As the Minister will be well aware, 88% of people say that Ireland should be proud of its record when it comes to international aid as a donor country. And we have been involved in some great initiatives which have transformed and saved the lives of millions of people, and that is, I suppose, Ireland's legacy from its own experience. But of course, we are now in difficult times, and people rightly want to know that their money is being spent correctly. And one of the major issues that we put forward when the policy paper was being discussed was, how is it we're borrowing so much money, every cent that we're borrowing when it comes to our overseas aid budget, that most of the money is actually going back to European institutions themselves. Irish people, the 88% that we're talking about, are proud of our work in our partner countries. But if they knew that most of the money that we are borrowing is going back to EU countries, to institutions that are using it for their own programme work, I'm not too sure that the Irish people will be so supportive. They are supportive of concern, they are supportive of the NGOs, but most of our overseas aid budget doesn't actually go to those organisations that do tangible work on the ground. It goes to EU institutions that then use the money on their policies themselves. So I would ask the Minister, and we did put forward this and put it forward in my proposal, that at the very least, the interest that we're being charged on the borrowings of the 600 million will be taken into account when we're giving it back giving back the money to other EU institutions. We are, borrowing it, as I said, from one EU institution, giving it back to other EU institutions, and it's not, tens of millions; it's hundreds of millions we are giving back to these EU institutions. I don't want to go down and say that we should stop paying overseas aid budget, but I think we should be more targeted in our approach and where it's actually having a huge effect, which it is doing in our partner countries. And partner countries where we are taking a lead role in education and health. I was in Zambia myself, where with the Clinton Foundation we are making a huge difference to the lives of the people on the ground. That's what Irish people want to see their overseas aid budget spent on. They don't want to see it being eaten up by a bureaucracy at EU level, and then very little of it.
It's not true.
The figures
I'll answer.
Yeah, that's fine, but Minister, the figures are there in the overseas aid reports. When asked how much of it is actually going to EU institutions, to the World Bank, a huge proportion of it is going, and you can give me the figures if you want, Minister, but a huge proportion of it is going to those organisations. And people want to support, and we support our overseas aid project. I know that it's being rolled up into foreign affairs and trade, and there is obviously an element to that where Africa is growing at such a huge rate in terms of its GNP that there is huge trade opportunities. But obviously we don't want to go down the route of our neighbours who insist on aid and trade being tightly linked, and that if they account the sale of military weapons in some countries as a form of aid, which I find probably something that we would not support. But I suppose what we're looking for, and the Minister touched on it, and I obviously this is going to happen. It happens in all countries, in every government where there is abuse of money, and when we see money being spent, lavish amounts of money being spent on a wedding in Malawi. I think 3 million was spent on the wedding of the Prime Minister and the President, a member of the Cabinet, and yet, when Irish people see their overseas aid budget being given to Malawi, and seeing such reckless spending by the government and the President, it undermines our overseas aid budget. The same, and the Minister touched on it well, in relation to the buying of fighter jets in Uganda. and obviously the issue that was picked up by our auditing system, which tells us that our auditing system is working, and the misappropriation of funding there. But you know, people have to accept that these things are going to happen. That's why we have an auditing system. Using that as a reason to pull back on overseas aid, I won't stand over it. My party won't stand over it. You know, it's quite easy to make the headline that we should pull out of our funding for Uganda because people have taken the money and misappropriated the money for their own uses. We have to accept that's going to happen. But we have to have, and the Minister does that through his department, ensuring that the auditing system is there, that we make sure that any money that goes into the system is properly spent and properly allocated. But you know, it is a concern, and I'd like to hear the Minister's response in relation to the amount of overseas aid that hits the ground. That's what we want. Everyone wants to see it hitting the ground and being used effectively. But the concern is that as our percentage of overseas aid goes down, as the money that we allocate towards overseas aid unfortunately goes down because of our own situation, we are committed to various programs at EU level that we must give, the Minister might correct me on this, 1.7% of a particular fund. I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and every so often we're asked that 120 million over 5 years would be allocated to a certain EU fund from the Department of Foreign Affairs. That comes out of our overseas aid budget, and it goes over to a EU institution which we have an input into, but very little control over. My suggestion to the Minister is that we would target the funding towards the NGOs and towards our partner countries, which we have the control over and which we have better outcomes that are visible to the Irish public, whose support is vital and critical to the...
The way it is.
I'm just...
I'll go into greater detail later.
I'll send you on the report that when they came in before us in the Foreign Affairs Committee, and we pointed out the percentage of money that we have to give to these EU institutions. You know, we're tied to figures, so you know it doesn't lend to support of the overall project. But obviously, we are, as a party that committed to the 0.7%, we are very supportive of the Minister's efforts and wish him every success in his office. Thank you.